wanted to start with what James and I were just actually kind of discussing, and that is the Democrats' inaction and propensity to create, fictional hurdles or fabricated hurdles to put in their way to create excuses for why they have not done the very things that that they ran on and have promised for 10 or 15 years. So I want to start with the article that I sort of teased in that conversation with James. This is in Truth Out, and it's about the voting rights legislation that the Democrats are currently, I say, pretending to fight for, because they won't remove the filibuster to actually fight for it, right? This is a whole nother layer to this, is that Kamala Harris is deciding not to, as president of the Senate, end the filibuster. She could single-handedly. She doesn't need any other senators to do it. She could just end the filibuster, and is choosing not to. So anyhow, even if they were going to fight for this particular piece of legislation, even if they were going to end the filibuster and try to pass it, there are many problems with this particular piece of legislation. So this, again, Truth Out. Third parties may disappear from ballot under Freedom to Vote Act provisions. Should a major political party use a voting rights bill to rid itself of minor party competition? That appears to be happening with the recently introduced Freedom to Vote Act, now before the Senate. A pared-down version of the For the People's Act would eliminate public funding for presidential campaigns by terminating the Presidential Election Campaign Fund, a post-Watergate era reform meant to reduce big donors' influence in presidential races by providing an alternate public funding source for campaigns. For over 30 years, this reform was embraced by major and minor party presidential candidates alike, but in recent cycles, only Green Party nominees qualified for presidential primary matching funds. Major party presidential candidates have eschewed both presidential primary matching funds and general election grants because these programs limit the amount of private funds candidates can spend if they accept public funding, and because the amount of public funding is not enough for major party candidates who now raise hundreds of millions in private funds. So I wanted to note this as part of the discussion about the voting rights fight, is that Democrats have, as James and I talked about, they've gone after the Green Party, they've gone after independent candidates, they've gone after primary opponents within their own party. There is just no acceptance whatsoever of challenging their power, no matter which lane you decide to challenge it from. And this another example. They get to optically pretend or present themselves as though they are fighting for voting rights, and instead they're really fighting to further sort of monopolize the entire electoral process. They and the Republicans would then have an even more firm grasp, a duopoly over our politics, right? So the Democrats, you might notice, pivot from socioeconomic issues that their donors very much care about, and instead want to discuss voting rights, which, again, it's not an issue that the banks of the world, that big oil, that Walmart and Amazon care much about, right? Because since they have both parties in their pocket, they really don't much care who wins. There's no structural change that's coming from a Democrat replacing a Republican or vice versa. There would be the threat of structural change from third parties, though. So this is awfully convenient of Democrats to pivot to an issue that their donors are fine with, where they get to optically look, as though they're on the right side, as though they're supporting and protecting democracy. And yet what they're really doing is further entrenching their grasp on our political process, or further, sort of strengthening their grasp on our political process. So to back up the claim that I have made a couple of times, I just don't want this to go uncited. Believe it or not, this is MSNBC, and this article was from last February. So I want you all to note the change in rhetoric and how they discuss this stuff at different periods in time. Vice President Kamala Harris could kill the filibuster herself. She's president of the Senate under the Constitution. That could be useful. Have you seen anybody, you guys? I just looked up this morning when I was prepping for this show. I looked up articles about this because I wanted to be able to cite it, right? And when I did that Google search, the most recent articles were from like half a year ago. So once the fight over the filibuster heats up, the media starts ignoring what they've already demonstrated to you they know. That is that Kamala could single-handedly, unilaterally eliminate the filibuster without the approval of any other members of Congress. So That's awfully convenient, isn't it? Because the Democrats get to pretend that the filibuster is this major hurdle for them to do anything. And it's just not. It's a fabricated hurdle. It's not really an obstacle that's in their way at all. They could eliminate the filibuster tomorrow if they so chose. And they're continuing not to. So between the myriad of EOs, executive orders, that Biden is sitting on that he could do, some of which he promised he would do day one, just to give a couple examples, Biden said that day one he would undo all of Trump's executive orders that pertain to immigration. He has not done that. We're over a year in. There are still a lot of EOs that Trump passed on immigration that are in effect. So he's maintained Trump's policy on immigration. He's actually deported more people in his first year than Trump deported in his. Okay. He could do executive orders pertaining to climate action. Instead, what he has done, as I mentioned earlier, he has instead, and we're going to get into this a little bit later too, he has instead granted more drilling permits in his first year than Trump granted in his. Okay. He did an infrastructure bill that was a handout to big business that was a net negative for the climate. We know that the Secretary of Education could cancel student loan debt if they so chose. He has decided not to do that. They decided to fold to the parliamentarian on the $15 minimum wage. Parliamentarian is an advisor. They have no power whatsoever and can easily be overruled or replaced. The Biden administration instead decided to grovel to the parliamentarian. Over and over again, right? There's all these executive orders that he could do. There are all these instances where he could have overruled something or used his power to pass his purported agenda, and instead he has sat on his hands. So the notion that the Democrats are just fighting as hard as they can and you just need to give us a few more seats, it's all complete nonsense, you guys. If it weren't Manchin and Sinema obstructing, the villain would simply rotate, and it would be Tester and Kelly or Coons or Reed or Feinstein or fill in the fucking blank. Okay. They have a whole bench ready to step up and take the position of rotating villain. So just don't fall for the notion that the Democrats are trying as hard as they can and there's just one or two people in the way, right? If that were the case, Biden would be doing executive order after executive order. Kamala would have already eliminated the filibuster, and they'd be using the bully pulpit to get whatever remained that needed to go through Congress done. They've not done any of that, which speaks to their intentions. I've used this metaphor over and over, you guys, so I apologize for those who've heard it like 17 times. But if I call myself a vegetarian while I'm shoveling meat down my gullet, I'm not a vegetarian. You don't get to say, I support X, Y, and Z, and then when you have the power to do X, Y, and Z, you choose not to, then you don't fucking support X, Y, and Z. That's like the Democrats want it both ways. They want to optically say, oh, I'm a staunch supporter of this, and then they turn around and block it from happening. And then they turn around and demand your vote because otherwise some big bad Republican's going to step into the office, right? So just do not fall for this lesser evil trick. Right. I want to show you guys a piece to kind of back up some of the shit I've been saying here and more. So this is from Tracking Biden from the Left. It's in Substack. They are a great follow on Twitter, Tracking Biden from the Left, if you're not following them. Biden was not progressive in year one. A comprehensive list of everything that Joe Biden and his administration have done that was against a progressive agenda throughout the first year. Now, I'm just going to go through some of these, you guys. It's a very long, you can see it's alphabetical there, and we're only down through B or C. Airstrikes in Syria. Because of crippling U.S. sanctions, 23 million of 39 million Afghans not having enough food to eat. Killing 10 people in a drone strike in Afghanistan. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Approving a $650 million potential air-to-air missile deal for Saudi Arabia. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Biden signing a $768 billion defense budget, 37 billion more than last year's budget. By the way, Congress gave him more than he asked for, as they usually do, but they can't be bothered to approve funding for things like healthcare or education or housing reform. Choosing Rahm Emanuel as the U.S. ambassador to Japan, not sanctioning Mohammed bin Salman for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, approving the sale of $735 million in precision-guided weapons to Israel, reaffirming the United States opposition to an international criminal court investigation into possible war crimes in the Palestinian territories. The Biden administration opposing the resolution blocking weapon sales to Saudi Arabia, spending more on Israel than climate change, continuing to support the Saudi blockade in Yemen. We're going to get into that as well. Continuing the Trump Pentagon's policy of embracing landmines, continuing a Trump policy that boosted armed drone exports, continuing us to support a coup in Venezuela, conditions in Guantanamo Bay being worse now than they were under Trump. That was just foreign policy, you guys. He went into immigrations here, mass deportation of Haitians, using Title 42 to expel 690,000 people, holding 22,000 people in jails run by ICE, 7,000 more than Trump held when he left office. U.S. deportations of children increased by 30% in Biden's first year in office. On and on and on and on. Domestic policy, cutting federal unemployment benefits to make unemployment numbers look better. Then they boasted about that. They bragged that unemployment had dropped more in a year than at any other time in history after they threw a bunch of fucking people off of UI. The Biden administration approving 3,091 new drilling permits on public lands. We're going to get into this briefly too. The Biden administration asking the Supreme Court to rule that federal agents cannot be held accountable for retaliating against protected speech, naming Neera Tanden, the White House staff secretary, vigorously defending an exemption to anti-LGBTQ discrimination laws for religious schools. Vigorously in quotes, because that's probably the word they use, sending more military equipment to American neighborhoods than Trump did. He also, by the way, increased federal subsidies to police departments, while he said that he would reform policing, supporting a Supreme Court decision that blocked immigrants in the U.S. on humanitarian grounds from getting permanent residency if they entered illegally, on and on. Continuing the Trump era practice of labeling Black Lives Matter protesters as terrorists. He still labels BLM a terrorist group, you guys. You can see on and on. COVID, on and on. Other, on and on and on. Okay. Fantastic work there from tracking Biden from the left. He's been far from progressive at virtually every turn. He has not done the progressive thing. There are a grand total, you guys, of 3 things that I could even think of that could be deemed progressive. And I'm going to break each of them down briefly here. The stimulus checks, which he lied about. He said, we'll give you $2,000. They instead gave $1,400 and counted the 6 that we got from Trump as part of the equation, which is patently insulting to anybody who can do basic addition and subtraction. But that was at least a check going out to people. And what do you know? He was wildly popular after he did it. So that was one minor thing that he did that was progressive. The child tax credit, which they had just allowed to expire. So one of the things that he did that was moderately progressive, was not permanent, only lasted a year, and then they allowed to expire in an election year. And the third thing is the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which is, I give him credit because he's done what 3 straight presidents have promised to do, right? But I don't want anyone to make the mistake of thinking that we are out of Afghanistan entirely. There still is intelligence there. There still are contractors there. And I also don't want anyone to make the mistake of thinking that Biden's foreign policy has been good in general. So that's like one, a broken clock is right twice a day issue on foreign policy. There's 3 things that I can think of. Are those gonna convince any progressive that Biden has done a good job or been progressive in office? Of course not. It's insane, you guys. So stack the list I just read you up against the 3 bare minimum / inadequate policies that I was able to name that Biden's actually done. It's remarkable, you guys. It's remarkable. Ran on saying he'd handle COVID. He has not handled COVID. He's groveled to big business and big pharma instead, right? Refuses to pass the TRIPS waiver, etc. Just everything he ran on, every promise he made seems to be reneged upon, whether it's the parliamentarian's fault or Joe Manchin's fault or Republicans' fault or whatever. I mean, he admitted, you guys, I didn't clip up any parts, but that fucking press conference he gave the other day, it's how do you even describe how humiliating that was? One of the things he said was how he was so surprised that Republicans had been so obstructive. You guys, this is the vice president from the Obama administration saying he was surprised that Republicans were obstructing him. You guys, this is the guy who was in a meeting with, what's his name? The former Speaker of the House, not Paul Ryan, but God, I can picture his face. He looked all fake and he always had the fake tan and shit. God damn it, Republican. Jesus, it's just tip of my tongue. Anyway, this guy famously told Biden in negotiations that when Biden went through his spiel about what he wanted, what he was trying to negotiate for, John Boehner, my God, that was going to bother me. Boehner famously told Biden behind closed doors, "You act like I care," when Biden presented his agenda for negotiation. This is the man that was surprised that the Republicans have been so obstructionist. Are you fucking kidding me? I mean, I don't know what's a worse interpretation of this. Either he's just out and out lying to try to make himself look better, That's bad, but it might be even worse if he's actually naive enough to have believed it. That's even like that's, you know, if the president is that easy to fucking dupe, you know what I mean? Then we're in a bad place. And Biden's cognitive capacities are not exactly showing in an impressive way, are they? So that wouldn't be surprising either. But you guys get the point here. To whatever degree you want to believe it's malicious intent and corruption, or to whatever extent you want to believe it's incompetence and ineptitude, wherever on that spectrum you fall on any of these given issues, the result is the same. And that's that they have done nothing of substance. Nothing. The only things of substance that Biden has done have been bad things, like approving 3,000 plus drilling permits, which was more than Trump approved in his first year. That kind of thing. We'll get into that here real quick, too. So this is in biologicaldiversity.org. Thousands of permits okayed despite president's authority to end drilling by 2035. New data, Biden's first year drilling permitting stomps Trump's by 34%. New federal data shows the Biden administration approved 3,557 permits for oil and gas drilling on public lands in its first year, far outpacing the Trump administration's first year total of 2,658. Nearly 2,000 of the drilling permits were approved on public lands administered by the Bureau of Land Management's New Mexico office, followed by 843 in Wyoming, 285 in Montana and North Dakota, and 191 in Utah. In California, the Biden administration approved 187 permits, more than twice the 71 drilling permits that Trump approved in that state in his first year. Quote, Biden's runaway drilling approvals are a spectacular failure of climate leadership, said Taylor McKinnon at the Center for Biological Diversity. Avoiding catastrophic climate change requires ending new fossil fuel extraction, but Biden is racing in the opposite direction. On Wednesday, more than 360 climate conservation, indigenous, environmental justice, and community groups petitioned the Biden administration to use its executive authority to phase out oil and gas production on public lands and oceans. The petition provides a framework to manage a decline of oil and gas production to near zero by 2035 through rulemaking using long dormant provisions of the Mineral Leasing Act, Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, and the National Emergencies Act. Without such action, it will become increasingly difficult for the United States to meet its pledge to help avoid 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming and its unprecedented social, environmental, and economic damage. And they go on. So I just wanted to point out, you guys, that this was one of those emergency issues. You cannot vote third party or sit out, because if Trump gets elected again, we're going to burn the planet. And what's Biden done? He's just said, go ahead and hand me that blowtorch. I'll keep it up. It's unbelievable. It's remarkable, honestly. And this is coming this is one area, you guys, where I was under no illusion that Biden was going to be good. I didn't think he would invoke policy that was actually robust to fight climate change. But I must admit, I didn't expect him to be literally worse than Trump on the climate, right? Wouldn't you think he'd at least every now and again reject a permit application so we could brag about it to the left? No. He rejected one pipeline early on that was a pipeline that was getting some public attention, and that was the only time that he has done anything that could even be viewed as theatrically progressive on the issue of climate. So just example after example after example of how the Biden administration has chosen inaction. And I really want to drive home the point, you guys. This is a series of decisions that they've made. This is not like losing a fight. This is not they're trying as hard as they can and they just don't have quite enough institutional power. Do not fall for that. As I've listed over and over again, executive orders, removing the filibuster, bully pulpit, etc. There are a myriad of options that the Biden administration has if they would actually like to pass their agenda, which is why I think it's pretty clear that they really don't. They just want the benefit of being able to rhetorically say that they want to pass their agenda. And as a result of all this, actually, very quickly, I'm going to show you guys a clip. This is the kind of shit you shouldn't fall for. This is Jen Psaki discussing the failures on voting rights. We discussed the nuance of that a little bit earlier, but this is Psaki's messaging on the issue. We'll come back and discuss.
My advice to everyone out there who's frustrated, sad, angry, pissed off, feel those emotions, go to a kickboxing class, have a margarita, do whatever you need to do this weekend, and then wake up on Monday morning, we got to keep fighting. And what that means, Lindsay, is we have to keep talking to members about federal legislation. That's essential. That's something that can be permanent, that can make sure people's rights are protected. But we also need to make sure people are educated in states across the country about what their rights are, how they can vote, when they can vote, how to request an absentee ballot. There's a lot we need to do on that front, and that's going to rely on the energy and the anger of that activism as well.
You know what else people need to be educated on? They need to be educated on the two paths that this party could currently use to abolish the filibuster and then pass the Voting Rights Act that they're pretending they support. You know what else voters need to be educated on? The fact that that voting rights bill has some horrendously concerning aspects to it surrounding third-party voters. That's what the voters need to be educated on. You know what voters should know? Voters should know that Kamala Harris could undo that filibuster tomorrow, and she's choosing not to. Voters should know that the party that holds both houses of Congress could use that power to undo the filibuster to pass the things that they're pretending they can't pass. That's what voters should be educated on there, Jen. So she is unfortunately quite an effective propaganda artist because she effectively sort of deflects to this like she doesn't want to talk about the policy itself, so she instead sort of says like, go get some rest and we'll come back fighting and whatever she tries to deflect to something that's totally devoid of substance but that seems relatable, you know. And I think to a lot of the liberal crowd, Jen is quite effective at that, unfortunately. So just understand, you guys, this is not, they're going to portray it as this big fight that's happening and they're throwing slugs at each other and we're just doing the very best we can. We're hitting the Republicans as hard as we can. Do not fall for it. Do not fall for it. There are, as I've described, a number of avenues that they could take to accomplish the things they're pretending they can't accomplish. And to now show you the results. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. To show you the results in terms of polling numbers. This is registration. So this is voter registration per party. The data comes from Gallup, and this is reported in Axios. Charted, GOP surged as Biden slumped. Percentage of Americans who identify with or lean to the Republican or Democratic Party. So to be clear, this does include independents, and it was basically they were divided by which party they lean towards. Okay. So registration for Democrats, you can see there through the second quarter of 2021, they were up 49% to 43%. And then over the next quarter, that fell to 45 to 44%. And in quarter four of this last year, Republicans were up 47 to 42%. Guys, that is like catastrophic. That is utterly catastrophic for the Democratic Party. That's almost unbelievable. That's a precipitous decline for the Democrats. That is them reaping what they sow. Okay. They didn't even, you know, I use the analogy a lot, and I hear the analogy a lot in politics that we get thrown the tiniest little slice of the cake and we're told to fight over it while the rest, you know, while the powerful run off with the whole rest of the cake. And then they sit there and tell us, you know, it's the immigrants' fault that you don't have a bigger piece and do the demagoguery and all that stuff. That analogy is very apt and very useful. In this case, it's like Biden didn't even bother to throw us the small piece. And then they wondered, like, why aren't we getting any support? Why are we polling so low? You know, maybe it's because you won't do any of the fucking shit that you've been running on for 15 years. I don't know. You know, I don't have my doctorate in political science, but maybe it has something to do with that. Maybe it's that you continually do not do the things you promise and the things that you campaign on. Maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe it's because you said you could work with everyone and get shit done, and you've done fuck all in a year. I don't know. Again, I'm no political scientist, you guys, but just throwing out that might have something to do with it. So anyhow, one other bit that I wanted to show you here. I'm sorry, I had so much to talk about with this whole Democratic ineptitude. This is Paul Begala, who's a Democratic strategist who went on cable news to essentially voter blame. They're already starting, you guys. They're already starting. Michelle Obama tweeting out that we have to vote like our democracy depends on it, right? All the same rhetoric that they're just going to load back up into the gun and regurgitate through their corporate media outlets for another 2 fucking years. So buckle up. This is Paul Begala blaming the voters for the Democrats, utter inaction.
President Biden put more effort into getting infrastructure passed, for example?
Well, he got infrastructure passed, and that's a good thing because success can breed success. He is putting the full force of the presidency behind it. I think the problem for the Democrats right now is not that they have bad leaders. They have bad followers.
Just right out there in the open. Mask off. You guys, even if you are, and I know my audience is not, but let's just do a thought exercise. Even if you're sympathetic to the Democrats and think that they mean well and think that they want the best and that they're actually fighting for the stuff they're fighting for, even if you are in that camp, who at home thinks it's a good political strategy to tell the voters, you fucking suck. You're a bad follower. Now vote for us at the midterm. I mean, do you see how detached from reality these people are? Do you see how stuck in their elitist bubble they are? They think telling voters, hey, you guys fucking suck. They think that's voter outreach. In what world do you think that's going to help your cause? Not to even get into how remarkably ridiculous it is to start with. It's a bit like blaming the fans at a baseball game because your team lost, isn't it? I mean, it's ridiculous on the surface. What causes voters to vote? That's why there's this whole industry called political science. It's not, So the substance aside, who in their right mind thinks that this is a good strategy to win voters over? And yet this is what the Democrats do. Hillary tells them they're deplorable, right? Blame the voters for not turning out when you refuse to act on the things you've promised. You are the one in power. Stop it with blaming the powerless for everything. Stop it. The powerful are the ones to blame. That applies to virtually everything. So I don't know. I'm just, I'm so. It's not that I didn't expect these lines of nonsense to come from Democratic talking heads. It's not that I wasn't expecting this rhetoric to rebirth itself. It's not that I was expecting Biden to do anything, but I'm so fucking frustrated by how repetitive this hellish draconian political world that we live in is. It's like it's in 2-year cycles and it just cranks out over and over again, 2-year cycles of the same nonsense. Vote like our democracy depends on it so we can win office and do fucking nothing about it. And then Trump can take it from us because we did nothing about it. And then we'll run again on you got to vote for us, existential crisis, Trump's so bad. And then we'll win office and then we'll do nothing. And then we'll lose. It's just this fucking cycle that we cannot break ourselves out of. And that's why we need things outside the political sphere. That's why we need organizing. That's why we need strikes and labor movements. That's why we need unions, right? That's why we need mutual aid. All sorts of stuff. So anyway, I felt the need to cover, lately the Democrats have been hooting and hollering about how they can't get anything done. I've even seen people start to blame the left. You guys, where do I even start with that? Like, I didn't queue up any clips because I don't even want to give that any attention. It's so fucking absurd. The things the left supports have like 70, 80, 90% approval rating throughout the country. Democrats refuse to do those things. Hence, they are unpopular. They're unpopular because they are too much like the Republicans, not because they oppose the Republicans. But they always convince themselves or, work backwards, reverse engineer the conclusion that, we must have gone too far to the left. We've got to pivot back to the fucking fascists. We've got to appeal to the fucking white nationalists over there in the Republican Party, or else we're not going to win any elections. That's what they always convince themselves of, and I'm just so fucking tired of it, you guys. It's such obvious nonsense, and again, encourage you all to get involved in outside areas. If you have good candidates running in your area that want to actually fight this system, support them. And other than that, go support general strikes and strike movements and unionization efforts and mutual aid and that kind of thing. because we're just to a point now where direct action is clearly the only avenue. The Democrats have now had both houses of Congress and the White House twice in a decade. The first time they also had a supermajority in the Senate. And what did we get? We got a Republican healthcare plan. We got a healthcare plan written by the Heritage Foundation that was initially endorsed by Nixon, that was endorsed by Bob Dole and Chuck Grassley, that was first implemented by Mitt fucking Romney. That's what we got for a supermajority in the Senate, a majority in the House, and the White House. By the way, that President Barack Obama, the mainstream press fear-mongered about as though he was a communist. And what did we get? We got a right-wing healthcare plan that they still bitched about. Okay, our politics in this country the Overton window has swayed so far to the right that it is almost comedic at this point. And I just don't know how else to express how it's a clown show. It's a dumpster fire, right? And the Democrats have victimized themselves with their do-nothing strategy here. And they'll have no one to blame but themselves when they get destroyed this coming election cycle.